Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. There's two big events in the sky coming up the next couple weeks. April 8th, I believe, we have a solar eclipse. Yep, the big one, where the moon moves in front of the sun and you can't look up because, well, it's just not good to get that kind of x-rays in your eye. It can burn your retina, it can cause cancer, it can do all sorts of things you don't want. So let's just remember to keep our heads down that day. And it's happening pretty much across North America, so check your local listings. The other important thing, we're going to have a nova. Now, a nova is not like a supernova where the star explodes, but it kind of emits its outer shell very, very quickly. The closest analogy would be, there is really no close analogy, but picture a multi-layered cake, and it blows off one of those layers, but the rest of the cake remains intact, ready to do it again. All impressive, all interesting the world of science. But there's a whole lot of people spreading a whole lot of falsehoods about both. And this is the astrology crowd. One of the more entertaining predictions I've heard is when the solar eclipse happens, there's going to be 3 days of darkness. This is what happens when you mingle your personal beliefs in with a system that is hopelessly out of date. An eclipse lasts half hour, 45 minutes. And it's not completely dark. As a matter of fact, I've been outside during an eclipse. And while it's barely springtime here, nothing's growing, the colors that come out are absolutely incredible. I'm not going to get to enjoy that. Maybe some other time. But that's the only thing that's different. It's not completely dark. But the astrologer people would have you believe that. Well, let's look at the astrologer people. The first thing, they believe in destinies. Now, there's a difference between fate and destiny. Destiny is fixed. No matter what happens, you are going to do this. Fate is changeable. As a matter of fact, in the earliest languages of the human race, they had the word nam for destiny. Nam tar was fate. Tar meant fate or destiny that could be cut up. So even the earliest languages, they had this concept of a destiny where you're going to wind up marrying a beautiful princess and living a fairy tale land, or prince, depending on your orientation. No judgment here. But astrology itself is based on ancient observations. It's an interesting window into humanity's past. In its present, there's a lot of problems with astrology. Again, a couple thousand years ago, astrology was the closest you could get to proper fortune telling. Kings and queens and emperors and empresses and ministers and sinisters did not like people foretelling the future because they were the agent between the divine and the regular person. And if somebody told the future, they might decide to make it happen, whether it was fate or destiny. So while they would usually have some sort of a royal astronomer or somebody appointed to keep track of where the stars and the planets were, it wasn't necessarily for any good reason other than self-preservation. That would usually be somebody trusted. Look at John Dee in Queen Elizabeth's court, the first one, not the second. Just as an example, and the same was true for the ancients. They knew having an astrologer around was useful. Having too many was dangerous. Now, why would astrologers be considered dangerous? Because despite the fact that astrology was the system that evolved into astronomy, the scientific measurement Astrology was kind of astronomy's dumb teenage years, where they go goth and get a weird haircut and put things in their nose. Yeah, astrology has acquired baggage from so many different places because humans like to watch the stars and humans like to read patterns into things. And so when they see, hey, on this particular date, um, we notice that a lot of kings passed away. So this is not a good date for that. And it was their job to track the cycles, and it was their job to set the calendars because they were using as much science as they had at the time. But to give you an example, Julius Caesar reformed the calendar. His son, well, adopted son, but Augustus Caesar reformed the calendar again. We're not even talking 50 years, and the Caesar has to get up and say, wait, we got to redo this stuff. His grandson, grandnephew, Claudius, had to redo it again. That's three times within a 150 year time frame. Your astrologers are obviously not doing something correct if you have to keep switching the calendar because the seasons are off three times in 150 years. And the Romans weren't dummies. They were the most clever people out there, but they sure as hell weren't dummies. But this is where the problem comes. Humans like association. Oh, we can see when Mars is in a certain constellation, we need to have a leap year. We need to do something to put the calendar back on right because people need to know when to plant their crops. People need to know when the ships are going to come in from Tarshish or wherever they're coming from. And that's where the nonsense comes in, where they try to read something deeper and more mystical. And it's understandable because the stars are in the heavens. Oh, the heavens are where the gods live. So obviously these things are moving around at the whim of the gods. They had geometry, but they were also trying to make sense of a system that didn't make a lot of sense to them. They didn't necessarily believe the world was flat. Some did, some didn't. There was no way to prove it either way back then. So they could apply these rudimentary scientific measurements through astrology and make up any claim they wanted. As long as you were right most of the time, you probably got away with it. Or you could use astrology as your tool, saying, that's Jupiter is in the fifth house, so therefore it's an omen of money. I'm making that up. I have next to zero astrology knowledge. I did take a course on it once, and it's awfully complicated. Like, give credit to the astrologers for the work that they do. They have to plot all these things out, figure out who's in what house, what degree is happening that particular. Too much math. Where we get into trouble is astrologers got into that groove and never got out of it, whereas astronomers got out of it and kept going. NASA, as in the North American Space Administration, about a couple of years ago, and I should have probably found the article to put in the comments, but I'm not gonna because it's easy to Google. NASA decided they were going to take a look at astrology. And you know what they found out? In the past 2,000 years, all the houses have shifted. Now this happens because the Earth has a slight wobble. And this is why the North Pole star switches every 26,000 years. I don't remember, don't quote me exactly, but there's 3 North Pole stars and the Earth winds up pointing to a different one every 10,000 years or so. Because of that, everybody getting their Virgo horoscope is now getting a Scorpio, or I can't even remember the way the darn things rotate, but you're one constellation away from where you should be. Did the astrologers take note that their measurements were off because, the planet has physically changed its position? No, they're still quoting us, oh yeah, Virgo September-ish. They're going to stick with their guns. And this is the problem. When a structure becomes so ossified, that means it's basically stuck in stone, that it cannot accept change. And change happens in everything. A week ago, today, I was standing looking out in my garden thinking, I should probably do something to start digging some holes and getting rid of some weeds. Today, there's, well, let's call it a centimeter worth of snow out there. So all that work would have been for nothing, because I do follow a couple rules. Number one, May 24th is when you plant. Astrology didn't tell me that. My dad did. The other rule I follow is watch the city. When the city starts planting things and working on their parks and gardens, they have meteorologists paid, well, millions of dollars collectively to figure out when is best to do that yard work, when is they're not going to lose money by doing it. I watch what I can immediately see and take the advice of my father. And the reason is, it works. It's been adapted through the years. They've figured that all out. And I don't need to do squat. But they don't just sit back and, well, I arbitrarily say May 24th, but a few years I've planted a little bit earlier because you can kind of tell when the good weather's going to stay. I didn't look up at the skies and say, oh, there's a nova. Or look in the papers and say, the papers, who am I kidding? Didn't look online and say, there's a nova. That means it's going to be an early spring, early fall, early whatever you want to call it. No, I just held my cards to my chest and made a logical decision that's completely different than the decision I made last year, because the weather is different. If you can't make a rational decision that changes, you're in a dangerous survival situation. And astrology is in that exact same thing. They're going to have their stereotypical reader who is either reading it for amusement or reading it for inspiration. And I've known a few of both. I'm not making fun of the people who believe in it. I could. It's just, I don't think it's very productive for anybody. And if that gives you meaning, all the power to you. Absolutely all the power to you. But astrologers, if any of you are listening, you need to redo your charts because things are different. Astronomers, keep doing good work because you've proved that the astrologers only get one thing right, and that's the Mars complex, where more athletes are born under the sign of Mars. There have been no studies yet on how delaying or delivering early might change a baby's aptitudes, because we only have one aptitude that there's a correlation with, and correlation does not equal causation. And also, it would be a huge ethical problem to get a study like that actually commissioned. I mean, wow. The data that they have, they're able to sit back and just look at birth dates, what the person became in their later life, and say, oh, okay, here, we can make this correlation. But actually manipulating people, even voluntarily, that's, yeah, you're getting into some dangerous 1930s territory at that point. So, the next couple of weeks, when you look up at the sun being covered by the moon, as it has millions of times before and will millions of times afterwards, it's not the end of the world. When you see a nova, which is not going to be much of a nova, a star that you can't see, you're going to be able to see for a couple of weeks, then you won't be able to see it again. Yay! When you see that nova, look up and say, wow, I'm witnessing something special that maybe my kids will see again one day, because it seems to go off every 50 or so years. And, I hope you live long enough that you get to see it again one day. I'm just trying to be realistic about human lifespans. And most importantly, remember, you have this little thing called free will. You're not destined to do anything. Your fate is measured by your personality. If I tend to be the person who's very aggressive and very headstrong, and I'm known to use illicit substances, it's a fair fate to predict that I might wind up in legal trouble due to those illicit substances. I'm not reading anybody's fortune, but with the circumstances I just laid out, yeah, you can see it happening. It's it's not a prediction, it's just simply looking into someone's future. That's how a lot of fortune tellers run their business. With that, I hope everybody looks forward to the next couple weeks in astronomical news. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Silverlight Show. If you did, please like, share, because sharing is caring. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Don't forget to click the notification icon down below so that way you can keep track with every episode that we release on the Silverlight Show. And we hope you have a fantastic day.